The hunting party found her at dawn, crouched in the crimson mud of the riverbank, with something small and broken cradled against her chest. Arya Winters didn't move when the circle of warriors closed around her. She didn't raise her hands in surrender or try to run. Her eyes, those soft Omega eyes that made alphas instinctively want to protect, remained fixed on the small bundle of fur in her arms. "Step away from the cub, Omega." The voice that spoke was not a mere warrior's growl. It was a command that made the very air vibrate with authority. It belonged to Alpha King Kale Shadowborn, ruler of the Northern Territories, and the most feared wolf in 3 kingdoms. He stood at the center of the circle, 7 feet of pure, predatory power wrapped in battle-scarred muscle. His silver-black fur rippled beneath his skin, his wolf so close to the surface that his eyes had already shifted to molten gold. The ceremonial spear in his hand, carved from ancient ironwood and marked with the kills of every king who'd carried it before him, was pointed directly at her heart. Arya's response was barely a whisper. "He's dying." The warriors exchanged glances. They could all smell it. The blood, the fear, the approaching death. Pup blood. Royal blood. "You killed Prince Nikolai." Kale's beta, Marcus snarled, stepping forward with claws extended. "You killed the king's nephew. You killed an heir to the throne." "No." Arya's voice cracked. She finally looked up, and the warriors saw something in her expression that made their weapons waver. Tears. The Omega was crying, not from fear, but from grief. "I found him like this," she said, voice breaking. "The Shadowhawks. They were still feeding when I scared them off." She shifted slightly, and they saw the deep gashes across the pup's small torso, the labored rise and fall of his chest. Nikolai couldn't have been more than 7 years old, barely old enough to shift on his own. His eyes were half closed, his breathing shallow and wet. Blood soaked through Arya's dress, and Omega's simple gray dress that marked her as packless, as unclaimed, as worthless in the eyes of most alphas. "Lies," Marcus spat, but his voice carried less certainty now. Omegas were many things. Weak, vulnerable, meant to be protected and controlled. But they weren't killers. Especially not of pups. And it went against their very nature, against the biology that made them nurturers, caregivers, the heart of any pack. "Look at my hands," Arya said, holding up one palm while keeping the other beneath Nikolai's head. Her fingers were torn and bloody. Defensive wounds, the marks of Shadowhawk talons. Her forearms bore deep scratches where she'd obviously fought something with wings and claws, and vicious intent. "I fought them off," she continued, voice steadying with desperate truth. "I've been carrying him for 4 hours trying to get back to your territory, trying to find help." The Omega settlement she'd come from was in the opposite direction. They all knew this. Miles in the opposite direction, across hostile territory, where a lone Omega would be easy prey for rogues, for predators, for alphas who didn't respect the old laws. She'd carried a dying pup toward danger, not away from it. Kale's spear point lowered an inch. His golden eyes narrowed, studying her with an intensity that would have sent most wolves to their knees. "Why?" he demanded. "Why would you risk yourself for a pup you don't know? A pack you don't belong to?" "Because he's a child." Arya's voice broke on the last word. "Because when I found him, he looked at me and he was scared. He didn't understand why he was in pain. He kept calling for his mother. He kept asking when his uncle would come save him." Her eyes met Kale's, and something passed between them, yet something that made his wolf go utterly still. "I couldn't leave him alone," she whispered. "I couldn't let him die scared and alone in the mud." The warriors understood enough about Omega instincts to recognize truth when they saw it. This was genuine. This Omega, this packless, powerless girl, was mourning a pup she'd never met. was grieving for a royal child as if he were her own. "The venom is already in his bloodstream," Marcus said quietly, though his hostility had dimmed. Shadowhawk venom. Even if we ran back to the pack house now. He didn't need to finish. They all knew. Nikolai was dead. He just hadn't stopped breathing yet. Chapter 2. The goodbye aria nodded slowly, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked down at the small, broken creature in her arms. Nikolai's eyes opened slightly, focusing on her face with the dim confusion of the dying. His small hand, barely bigger than a human child's, reached up weakly toward her. "It hurts," he whispered in the ancient language all wolves understood, even across pack lines. "I want Mama. I want Uncle Kale." "I know," Arya whispered back, switching to that same ancient tongue with surprising fluency. "I know, little wolf. I know it hurts. Are you my mama?" Nikolai's voice was so small, so confused. "You smell nice. Like sunshine and honey. Like safe." Arya's breath hitched. "No, sweetling. But I'm here. You're not alone. I promise you're not alone. Will you stay? Until Mama comes?" "I'll stay." Arya's voice cracked. "I'll stay right here with you. I won't leave." What happened next would be retold in pack halls for generations, would become legend whispered around fires, would change the course of kingdoms. Arya Vale, the packless Omega who had lived on the borders for 2 years, who had been tolerated but never trusted, who had been seen as weak and worthless by every alpha who'd ever passed through, bent her head and pressed her lips to Nikolai's forehead. A kiss. Gentle and reverent, full of sorrow and love for a child she'd never met. The ancient gesture of comfort, of farewell, of a promise that death would not be cold and lonely. She held the position for a long moment, her tears falling into his fur, dampening the silver-brown fluff that marked him as royal blood. And then she began to hum, when it was a wordless sound, rising and falling in a pattern that seemed older than language. A melody that reached something primal, something that existed before wolves learned to speak. An Omega's lullaby, the song every wolf was born knowing, the sound of safety and love and home. Around them, hardened warriors felt their eyes sting, felt their wolves whimper in recognition of that ancient song. Nikolai's breathing slowed. His small body relaxed against her. The fear left his eyes, replaced by something that looked almost like peace. "Mama?" he whispered one last time. "She loves you," Arya whispered back. "She loves you so much. And she's waiting for you. Can you feel her? She's calling you home, little wolf. It's okay to go. It's okay." Nikolai's eyes drifted closed. His chest rose one final time, then fell still. Gone. The sound that came from Arya's throat was something none of the warriors had ever heard from an Omega. A keening wail that echoed off the canyon walls, raw and primal and utterly devastated. The grief howl of a mother who'd lost her pup. She rocked back and forth, clutching Nikolai's body, and the sound of her anguish could have come from any wolf mother who'd lost her child. It transcended designation, transcended pack law, transcended everything except the universal language of grief. One by one, weapons clattered to the ground. Kyle was the first. The ancient spear, the symbol of his authority, the weapon that had never touched the earth except in victory, fell from his claws and thudded into the crimson mud. His golden eyes were fixed on the Omega holding his nephew's body, and something in his chest was cracking open. Something he'd kept locked and frozen since his sister had died 3 years ago, since he'd become king and forgotten how to be anything except strong. Then Marcus dropped his sword. Then another warrior, and another, until 20 weapons lay abandoned in the mud, and 20 wolves stood with their heads bowed in respect. In wolf culture there were protocols for death. There were rites and rituals, and political considerations. But there was also something older, something that predated civilization and pack law and alpha dominance. The recognition of shared grief, of love given freely, of an Omega who had tried with everything she had to save a pup who wasn't hers, who'd never benefit her, who she'd never see grow up. Arya wasn't pack. She wasn't family. She wasn't even claimed. But in that moment she had become something every wolf understood. She had become sacred. Chapter 3. The Recognition. Kyle approached slowly, his massive frame seeming smaller somehow, as he knelt in the mud beside this tiny Omega who had crossed hostile territory to try to save his nephew. Up close, he could see everything. The blood soaking her dress, most of it Nikolai's, but some of it hers. The deep scratches on her arms where she'd fought off shadowhawks with nothing but her bare hands. The exhaustion in her face that spoke of hours of desperate travel. The way she was still humming that lullaby, even though Nikolai was gone, as if she couldn't bear to stop. "Give him to me," Cale said softly, his voice gentler than anyone had ever heard it. "I'll carry him home to his mother. You've done enough." Arya looked up at him with those soft Omega eyes, now red and swollen from tears. "I'm sorry," she choked out. "I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. I tried everything. I ran so fast. I called for help, but no one came. I tried—" Her voice broke into sobs. "You gave him comfort in his last moments," Cale interrupted, and his hand, the same hand that had torn apart enemies, that had killed without mercy, reached out to touch her shoulder with infinite gentleness. "You fought shadowhawks for him. You carried him for hours knowing he would die. You sang him into the next life with an Omega's lullaby." His voice roughened with emotion he'd thought long dead. "You gave him the greatest gift. You made sure he wasn't afraid. You made sure he felt loved." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "In my pack, this makes you honored. In my kingdom, this makes you protected. And in my heart," he stopped, swallowed hard, "this makes you family." The other warriors murmured their agreement, or a low rumble of respect that echoed through the canyon. Arya carefully, reverently, placed Nikolai into Cale's arms. The tiny body looked even smaller against the Alpha King's broad chest. She stood on shaking legs, covered in mud and blood and tears and grief. "I want to come with you," she said. "To your pack. I have to tell his mother I tried. I have to tell her he wasn't alone, that someone held him, that someone loved him at the end." Cale stood, cradling his nephew with a tenderness that contradicted everything the world knew about the fierce Alpha King. "You'll come," he agreed, "not as a petitioner or an outsider. You'll come as what you are, the Omega who showed my nephew more love in his dying moments than most wolves show in a lifetime." He turned to his warriors. "Marcus, send runners ahead. Tell my sister we're bringing Nikolai home. And tell her—" his voice cracked slightly. "Tell her he wasn't alone. And tell her an Omega held him, and sang to him, and made sure he knew he was loved. Yes, my king." Cale looked back at Arya, this small Omega who had done the impossible, who had made an Alpha King drop his spear, who had reminded him what it meant to care about something beyond duty and strength and power. "Can you walk?" he asked gently. Arya nodded, though she swayed slightly on her feet. Without a word, Kyle shifted Nikolai carefully to one arm and offered the other to Arya. She stared at the offered arm, an Alpha King's support, freely given to a packless Omega, with shock written across her face. "I don't bite," Kyle said, and there was the ghost of dark humor in his voice. "Not Omegas who save dying pups, anyway." Arya took his arm, her small hand barely wrapping around his forearm, and together they began the walk back to Shadowmoon territory. The warriors fell into formation around them, not guarding a prisoner, but protecting one of their own. Chapter 4. The Pack. By the time they reached the pack house, the sun had climbed high overhead. News had traveled fast. The pack lined the streets. Hundreds of wolves in human form, silent and solemn. Heads bowed as their king carried the small body of Prince Nikolai through the territory. And beside him walked an Omega. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Who is she? Why is the king touching her? Is that blood on her dress? She's packless. Look at her scent markers. But the whispers died when they saw Kale's face. When they saw the way he kept that gentle hand on Arya's arm, steadying her when she stumbled. When they saw the warriors walking with weapons lowered in respect. Something had happened. Something that changed everything. At the pack house entrance stood a woman who could only be Nikolai's mother, Kale's sister, Luna. She was beautiful in the way all royal wolves were, with silver-streaked hair and eyes like winter storms. And she was breaking. Kyle? Her voice was barely a whisper. Is he... I'm so sorry, Kale said, and the words were weighted with a grief he rarely let anyone see. We were too late. Luna's legs gave out. She would have collapsed if Marcus hadn't caught her. In lowering her gently to her knees, as the wail of a mother's anguish tore from her throat. Kyle knelt before his sister, laying Nikolai's body gently in her arms. She clutched her son, rocking and keening, and the entire pack felt her pain echo through their bonds. Luna, Kale said softly, waiting until her wild eyes focused on him. There's someone you need to meet. He gestured to Arya, who stood frozen with tears streaming down her face. This is Arya Winters. She found Nikolai after the Shadowhawks attacked. She fought them off with her bare hands. She carried him for 4 hours trying to get him home. Kyle's voice was rough, but steady. She held him as he died. She sang him to sleep. She made sure he wasn't afraid. Luna's eyes fixed on Arya, this small, blood-soaked Omega who was crying almost as hard as she was. You, Luna's voice broke. You were with my son? I'm so sorry, Arya sobbed. I tried. I ran so fast. I called for help. I did everything I could, but the venom. I couldn't. I'm so sorry. Luna stood on shaking legs and crossed the distance between them. For a moment, Arya thought the grief-stricken mother might strike her, might blame her, might hate her for being alive when Nikolai was gone. Instead, Luna pulled Arya into her arms and held her. 2 mothers, one who'd lost her child, one who'd tried desperately to save him, clung to each other and wept. Thank you, Luna whispered brokenly. Thank you for making sure he wasn't alone. Thank you for loving him when I couldn't be there. Thank you for giving him peace. Around them, the pack watched in silence as their Luna, their fierce, proud Luna, thanked a packless Omega for a mercy that transcended pack law and designation politics. Kale stood back, his golden eyes fixed on Arya with an intensity that made his beta shift uncomfortably. My king, Marcus murmured quietly. What are you thinking? That Omega, Kale said slowly, in her voice pitched for Marcus's ears alone, just taught our entire pack what it means to be wolf. She showed us that strength isn't just about dominance, that love doesn't require pack bonds, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is hold a dying child and sing. He paused, then added something that made Marcus's eyes widen. And she's not leaving. Ever. I don't care what pack law says about unclaimed Omegas. She stays, under my protection, in my territory, as family. The council will object. Then the council can challenge me. Kale's voice dropped to a growl. I am Alpha King. My word is law. And I say that Omega is pack now. Anyone who disagrees can take it up with my claws. Marcus bowed his head. Yes, my king. Chapter 5. The Bond, 3 days later, after Nikolai's funeral rites had been completed and his small body laid to rest in the royal burial grounds, Kale found Arya in the packhouse gardens. She sat beneath an ancient oak tree, staring at nothing, still wearing the simple dress the pack clothed her in after they'd burned her blood-soaked one. She looked lost, broken, like she was waiting for someone to tell her to leave. Arya. She looked up and her eyes widened when she saw him. She immediately tried to stand, to bow, to show submission, but Cale gestured for her to stay seated. "May I?" He gestured to the ground beside her. She nodded, clearly confused why an Alpha King would ask permission for anything. Kyle settled onto the grass, an undignified position for a king, but he didn't care. He was tired of dignity, tired of the weight of the crown. "My sister wants you to stay," he said without preamble. "She said you're the only one who understands, the only one who was there. She needs you." I can stay as long as she needs," Arya said softly. "But then I should go back to the border territories. I don't want to be a burden." "You're not going anywhere," Kyle's voice was firm. "You're pack now. Oh, Arya, officially. I've already registered you with the council." Her eyes went wide. "But I'm not, you can't just, I'm packless. I have no alpha, no sponsor. The law says an Alpha King can claim any wolf into his pack for acts of exceptional service or bravery." Cale met her eyes. "You fought Shadowhawks to protect a royal pup. You crossed hostile territory to try to save him. You gave him comfort in his final moments." He paused. "In my book, was that qualifies. But people will talk. They'll say I'm using Nikolai's death to gain status. Let them talk." Kyle's voice was hard. "Anyone who thinks you would use a child's death for personal gain didn't see you covered in blood and tears, singing him to sleep. Didn't hear you apologizing to his dead body like your heart was breaking. Didn't watch you grieve for a pup you'd never met like he was your own." He leaned closer, his voice dropping lower. "You stay, Arya. Not in the servants' quarters, not as some charity case. You stay in the main house as an honored member of this pack. You eat at my table. You walk these grounds with your head high, and anyone who has a problem with it answers to me." Arya stared at him, tears gathering in her eyes. "Why? Why would you do this for me?" Cale was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. This Omega who had reminded him what it meant to feel something beyond duty and rage. "Because when I saw you holding my nephew," he said finally, voice rough with emotion, "singing to him as he died, crying for a child who wasn't yours, I remembered something I'd forgotten." "What?" "What it means to have a heart." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "You gave that back to me, Arya. You reminded me that strength without compassion is just cruelty. That power without love is just tyranny." His hand lingered on her face, and something passed between them. Something electric. Something that made his wolf surge forward with recognition. "Mate," his wolf whispered. "Our mate. The one who understands grief. Who knows love. Who would die for pups that aren't hers." Kyle had thought his heart died with his mate 3 years ago. Thought he'd never feel that pull again. That recognition of souls that fit together like they were made for each other. But looking at Arya, this brave, broken, beautiful Omega who'd kissed his nephew's forehead and sung him to sleep, he felt it. The bond. The beginning of something that could be everything. "Stay," he said again, but this time it wasn't a command or an offer of pack membership. It was a plea. "Please, Arya, stay. Let me protect you. Let me give you the home you deserve. Let me—" He stopped, swallowed hard. "Let me get to know the woman who taught me how to feel again." Arya looked at him. This Alpha King who'd dropped his spear, who'd knelt in the mud, who was now asking instead of commanding. "Okay," she whispered. "I'll stay." Cale's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. Epilogue. 6 months later. Arya woke to golden sunlight streaming through windows 3 times the size of her old cabin's walls. The bed beneath her was soft, the blankets warm, and the arm wrapped around her waist was heavy with possessive comfort. She turned in Kyle's embrace, smiling at his sleeping face, softer now than it had been 6 months ago, less weighted by grief and duty. They'd taken it slow, courting in the old way, with walks and conversations and careful trust-building. Luna had helped, had become the sister Arya never had made sure the pack accepted their king's growing attachment to the Omega, who'd saved her son from dying alone. And slowly, as carefully the bond had formed, not forced by biology or pack law, but chosen, built on mutual respect and growing love and the shared memory of a small pup who'd brought them together. "You're staring," Kale murmured, eyes still closed but mouth curving into a smile. "You're beautiful when you sleep." "I'm terrifying when I sleep," Marcus says I growl. Terrifyingly beautiful." Kale's eyes opened, golden and warm. How did I get so lucky?" "You dropped your spear for me. Best decision I ever made." He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead, an echo of that first kiss she'd given Nikolai, now transformed into something new, something that was theirs. "Luna wants us to come to breakfast," Arya said. "She's made Nikolai's favorite. Says it's time to remember him with joy instead of just grief. She's healing. We all are." Kyle studied her face, this Omega who'd changed everything, or who'd brought love back to a pack that had forgotten what it meant. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." Arya smiled. "My Alpha King who learned to feel again. My Omega Queen who taught me how." Outside, the pack was stirring. Luna was cooking. The pups were playing. Life continued, carrying the memory of a small prince who'd died too young, held by an Omega who'd loved him in his final moments. And in the Alpha King's bedroom, yet two souls who'd found each other through tragedy, held each other tight, and chose every day to keep choosing love. Because sometimes the most powerful thing isn't a spear or a crown or an alpha's dominance. Sometimes it's an Omega's kiss on a dying pup's forehead. Sometimes it's the moment a king remembers how to cry. Sometimes it's choosing to love when the world says you shouldn't. And that, Arya thought as Kyle kissed her properly and thoroughly, was worth more than any kingdom.